We should be live. So yeah, generally speaking, as Dave was saying, we'll let people trickle in for a couple of minutes. We also make a few community announcements
hmm
and just start the discussion very lightly. So Dave, do you want to give some shout outs, some announcements?
Absolutely. So, Amanda, this is my favorite reoccurring announcement that we have at the beginning of every show.
A
Because as
few.
I'm sure you know, Vlad has a YouTube channel, Solus PLC, and they're like somewhere north of 22,000 subscribers. And so, at least me, I am on the bandwagon of the push of get Vlad to 100,000 subscribers, so we can have a silver play button up there next to I don't know the $50,000 of controllers sitting directly behind him. So this is my request for everyone watching on Solus PLC, the YouTube channel or otherwise, to please go ahead and give Vlad a subscribe on YouTube because he won't ask for it.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Abs- Absolutely, Vlad. But no, as well as Vlad mentioned in the beginning, guys, we will get started in just a couple of moments. As you know, the first 19 or 20 episodes are already on all of your podcast platforms, so you can check those out there, as well as check out all of the previous episodes on manufacturinghub.live, which is where if you guys don't get enough of us during this, you can continue to get even more of us. And we are continuing to roll into our career paths in manufacturing theme, and we continue to have some very exciting guests, as you guys can see Amanda up here. That pretty much hits me for all of my comments to begin with. Vlad, do you have anything to add?
I do not. Do you want to give us an official intro to the episode?
A- Absolutely. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy over here, Vlad. We are somehow in episode 25 on our career paths in manufacturing theme, and we have a very special guest today, Amanda Beaton of Siemens. And Amanda, as we'll get into, works with educational programs and works with educators to help kind of bring technical training to, I guess, everyone in schools, and as I'm sure you guys will know, it's something that Vlad and I honestly wish that we had more access to when we were younger. So, without further ado, Amanda, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Vlad.
Thank you very much,
Abs-
Amanda. Really appreciate it. So, I wanted to get maybe a short introduction from you, but I also want to learn about your beginnings at Siemens. So, just as your colleague Lewis, you joined through the rotational leadership program. And so, I wanted to get maybe some of your insights because Lewis said it was a very positive experience for him. So, I wanted to learn more how your experience went and what are maybe some of the learning points of that program and maybe some advice for those who are looking to get into something like that.
Sure. Yeah. I well, first of all, I'm gonna follow Solus PLC because I had
Thanks.
2001. I just made a note that I'm not following it, so I'll build your followership there. Yeah, I joined Siemens about 18 years ago in a similar program. It was called Operations Leadership Development Program, and I actually interned for GE when I was in college, and was lucky enough to intern in a manufacturing plant and kind of got the bug for working in manufacturing and making stuff and having that kind of work environment. So I knew that I wanted to go work somewhere in a plant and interned with a few different folks and liked the idea of rotating around to different plants, different job titles, different functions, so you could kind of get a taste of everything. I think Lewis said the same thing. So yeah, I went to work operations leadership development program where you do 4 6 month assignments in different locations and different job functions. I funny, I'm from Georgia, so I wanted to get out of Georgia and kind of start my career somewhere else. I went to college in Atlanta, so I also didn't want to go anywhere cold. So my primary motivation was to get out of Georgia, but not anywhere too cold. So my first job was an industrial engineer in a plant in Juarez, Mexico. It was new facility that we were building. So it was I think a really cool and accelerated opportunity to see everything in manufacturing because we built a plant. There were like 7 people working there when I started. So first time in Mexico and first day on the job. I got to work in a plant, and I worked in Mexico for several months. I worked for a few more months in El Paso, Texas, and I was a fabrication and maintenance supervisor for a little while there in El Paso, and kind of worked in between the two, between El Paso and Juarez. So got to see a whole lot of different things. And um, by the time I left the Mexican facility, there were probably 75 employees working there. So we really got to build assembly lines. My degree's in industrial and systems engineering. So old school assembly lines, manufacturing engineering. I did that for about the first year of my career, and then went on to do production scheduling and material planning and stuff like that, a little bit of supply chain. And yeah, so got several different flavors of manufacturing across 4 different manufacturing plants. So it, like Lewis said, it was really positive, really cool experience.
Really curious about that plant experience. Was that manufacturing like Siemens products from those assembly lines, or was that integrating Siemens products to assemble like third party
No,
items?
no integration of Siemens products. Interestingly enough, the facility in Juarez was building circuit breakers, metering load centers, typically like things for utilities that they for residential utility use. So just old school manufacturing.
Oh, that's really cool. I think that's a, I mean, I think the manufacturing environment in general is a really interesting start to a career because I think you get to touch a lot of different areas, right? Like you said, there was maintenance, there was engineering, there's
Hmm.
operations, there's at a certain level finance, and so it's
Right.
really cool to get your career started that way. And so that was part of a rotation, or that was your like assignment after the rotation? Just trying to
So,
understand.
yeah, the rotations were all manufacturing engineering, scheduling, supply chain, material planning, fabrication. I actually came back to work in Atlanta. We had a facility that was a union facility, a union manufacturing facility still in Atlanta. So I got the chance to be a supervisor in that facility and assembly and fabrication as well. So that was a really cool experience. Probably one of the most stressful times in my career at Siemens. So, but got to work there, and those were all rotations. And
Mhm.
then, funny you mentioned finance. I kept asking a lot of questions about how things are costed and how the manufacturing costs are rolled into product cost and just stuff like that. And what I kept asking, and they were like, "Please just go get an MBA and go get a finance. Just stop asking questions and stop talking." So Siemens paid for me. Um, I took a job off program, and I was a sort of a project manager off program. So that was my landing spot after 2 years, and I started an MBA at night. So it was an evening MBA that Siemens allowed me to go get and paid for. So I did that for a couple of years doing project management work, and we're actually moving manufacturing facilities around. So we were moving production from, we closed a facility in Miami and moved it into Juarez, Mexico, and then
Mhm.
moved some additional manufacturing. That was a little different type of manufacturing. We moved into a plant in Missouri, so spent a lot of time in Missouri at that point, and yeah, got an MBA too.
Awesome. That's a really interesting path, and I think we can go on many different tangents based on that. But I'd like to, finalize maybe where you are now before we dive into some of those other topics, because I want to talk about the transition and kind of, as you mentioned, the desire to go and quote unquote upgrade your skills through an MBA because of trying to understand all the facets of manufacturing. But I guess to come back to that question later, let's talk about what are you doing now and how did that transition took place also, because I think it's a very different role from my understanding from what you were doing earlier on in your career.
Yeah, it is really, really different.
Mhm.
So I'm now the U.S. program manager for a program and initiative in the U.S. called Siemens Cooperates with Education. So I sit in a group called Digital Industries Factory Automation, and the program again is Siemens Cooperates with Education. So the goal of my role is to take Siemens products, mostly factory automation style products, a lot of the stuff behind you, of course, and put those into high schools, community colleges, universities, research centers, workforce development type training centers, union training shops, any sort of educational environment, and allow students to learn on the very same technologies they would see in industry, usually in plants. So we take hardware and software and make them accessible for teachers and students, and we train teachers, we offer curriculum and things like that.
And how did that came to be? What I guess piqued your interest? Maybe Siemens suggested that it's something that you would make a good fit for? Like, how did that like transition take place throughout your career?
There were several steps. I don't know if we have time for all the steps. No, I worked in manufacturing for a while, like I said, and loved it. Um, Once I got the MBA, I wanted to do something a little bit different, so I took a different job once I graduated with the MBA and went into a product marketing role,
Hmm.
kind of representing those products that we made in Juarez in Mexico. So I did marketing for a couple of years and we actually did a big product launch. So after that, I felt like I'd done enough of product marketing and kind of reached the peak with the big product launch and rollout and did all the cool things you could do in product marketing. And I was looking for something else and looking for something different that wasn't so manufacturing, engineering, or product marketing. And a role opened up that was in sort of a program management office that had a lot to do with training. And we were creating a smaller apprenticeship program. Obviously, Siemens is a German company. So we were kind of bringing in some of the apprentice style hands on training schools of thought into the US back then, about 12 years ago. And we were again building the apprentice programs for like field service technicians and people to start with Siemens and doing a lot of things along the lines of training. And quite honestly, I thought it was interesting and I went to meet with the manager who had the job. Both my parents are school teachers, so
Hmm.
I never wanted to be a teacher, probably because both my parents are school teachers and elementary, middle, high schools. But I like the idea of this training and education angle. You still got to kind of interface with teachers and work with schools, work with students, and you were still in a learning environment, but you don't have to actually be like a middle school teacher to do it. So,
Right.
so it was,
Yeah.
it was
No.
a cool opportunity.
That sounds very interesting. And I mean, for as we had said at the beginning, I think we all wish that there was more controls and automation in schools in general throughout like college and universities and high schools, right? But I want to maybe I'm curious a little bit about the day to day, right? And so maybe the challenges also. Are you maybe educating the teachers? Are you trying to provide them with hardware? Are you building curriculums? Is it all of the above? What are maybe some of the pushbacks sometimes that you get? Is it because they have maybe not enough technical skills to train students? Like, what are the challenges in your role?
Yes, yes, all of the
Mm.
above. So,
Okay.
uh, yeah, we actually get quite a bit of curriculum developed globally. So we have a headquarter office that works to develop curriculum that we kind of share across the world. So just basic PLC curriculum, and we're always creating more. So there's been IoT curriculum added and things like digital twin projects, and all those things get added pretty consistently as the technologies develop, which is cool that the teachers have access to something coming from our headquarters and some interactive curriculum that's kind of the latest and greatest in automation. So I do spend a lot of time just communicating with teachers and instructors. Like you said, some don't come from industry, or if they do, they come from a different background. So they aren't PLC programmers, right?
Hmm.
They're not really, or they certainly aren't trained on Siemens in a lot of cases. So I do spend a lot of time just helping teachers, instructors, professors, lab managers, research, graduate assistants, people like that to work with the products to make sure they have all the tools they need or get them into workshops, classes, things so they feel comfortable and confident. Some people just haven't had experience with Siemens before. And a lot of times I find that people have the perception that Siemens is difficult to work with, or the products and the technologies and the software is difficult because they haven't seen it, or they've seen a version from 10 or 20 years ago. So it's just exposing them to what the product looks like and giving them 1 day, 2 day, 3 day workshops so they can kind of get a chance to hop in, take a license, take a PLC, see how it works, and get comfortable with it. And that usually convinces people that it's a cool way to teach PLCs and advanced manufacturing and concepts like that because it's fairly easy to use and easy to teach.
And you touch all as we discussed a little bit off stream, all levels of education, right? So there are programs at the high school level, there are programs at the, I would say, like vocational college level, and then there's going to be courses in university as well, correct?
Yeah, we actually do some outreach workshops at the middle school level. So we'll do
Middle
some
school.
very basic and controlled programming workshops for middle schoolers. And I have a middle schooler. I have two daughters, and it's really crazy how quickly they digest the materials, right? Because they weren't raised in the same generation we were raised in, so everything in their world is digital. So they can pop right into software and controlling environments, iPhones, iPads, and they're pretty good. So we certainly have some advanced manufacturing or mechatronics type workshops that might last an hour or a day that are just outreach to show them this is robotics, this is programming, this is what manufacturing looks like now. So really to change the perception early, and there are lots and lots of people who try to do this, that manufacturing isn't steel toe boots and dirty and smelly and greasy and oily. It's much different now. So we started trying to do more and more workshops to just give them a chance to play with, do programming and do cool stuff with software especially. But yeah, there are at least a few dozen high schools in the US that are teaching PLCs and things like that as part of advanced manufacturing courses. And they, the cool thing is people can actually graduate with certifications, certificates, and PLCs, drives, mechatronics. I know at several schools in the US, and they can stop there right after high school and go directly into a manufacturing environment if that's a path they choose. There's cool programs in a couple different states that I know of. They've done a nice job of creating a bridge from that high school to community college level, so they can kind of hop off at high school and go into a job immediately, or they can hop right into community college through a path that leads them from that high school program straight to a 1 year, 2 year, production, manufacturing, mechatronics type program. So there's some cool little pathways they can take that are mapped out clearly for them, because people in education have done a nice job of trying to map it for them.
I mean, as I keep saying, I really wish, I knew of all those paths available when I was back in school and in college, but it's really cool to see that, people are getting more aware of manufacturing in general, the different paths to automation. Again, there's different levels, right? If you complete the college certificate, I think you're definitely ready to become, some kind of a tech right off the bat, or if you decide to go to college, you can get an engineering degree, get into automation. So there's a lot of opportunities available for sure. But I want to reconfirm, I guess, the age. So you said middle schoolers are now getting exposed to PLCs, and I
Right.
don't have any kids myself, perhaps one day, but I know that a lot of our viewers are, sometimes asking questions. I had this discussion with a few of them. At what age can you start exposing kids to automation? And that goes maybe beyond an Arduino or Raspberry Pi, so something much more industrialized, like you mentioned, PLCs and HMI.
Yeah, for sure. And we have a little bit of a different programmer. It's called a Logo, programmable
Mhm.
relay. That's the programming environment. The software is called LogoSoft. It's what I use in a lot of middle school workshops because it's kind of, it's harder to break and it's harder to lock up. And that, for example, is something we use in middle school workshops just because it's so robust and it has a built-in simulator and it's really cool, and students can do a lot of things with it, but it's still really relevant to industry. Lots of different industries like agriculture and vending machines, car washes, places like that use logos all over the place. So
Hmm.
you can see them in real life, but you can also program them really easily because there's almost, it's like a visual base. It's just a very basic drag and drop programming environment that you can play with and then kind of run in simulation mode. So it's really simple, and it's still a programmable relay. So
Yeah, and I think that's really cool, right? Because again, an Arduino is, I think, rarely seen in industry, if ever,
right.
versus, PLCs like that are definitely utilized in machinery. So it's something that you will encounter in a real manufacturing environment. Dave, what do you think? What are your thoughts before we shift gears a little bit?
I have so many thoughts, Vlad.
Okay.
Similar to you, I absolutely wish that more of this was accessible. Even all the kits, growing up, nothing was, there were no PLCs or relays that I necessarily remember in your 101 automation or 101 electrical activity kits. So I guess kind of like the top question that I have for you, Amanda, is you're working with all these different groups. I imagine that, as they get into high school or college, there's some more free form kind of projects. Is there a project or a couple of projects that are either, built by Siemens or have been free form that stick out as very interesting?
Yeah, there are lots and lots of projects that have been interesting over the years. Of course, I'd say one that just got completed was we worked with some software folks from Siemens Software and Arizona State University.
Mhm.
And it was cool because the students, it was a small student team of 3 seniors who got a chance to get a lot of software tools that do our Siemens design software. And they built a fully working digital twin of a mechatronics line. And then they were able to take the mechatronics line and retrofit it with Siemens controls and get it working again and do all the wiring and stuff like that. So it was kind of the wiring, the mechanical connections, all the electrical connections, and the software of designing the whole thing, building it, and obviously a digital twin version, and making it all connect and work. So you could make changes in the software, you could make changes in the hardware, and kind of see the connection between the two, which is the whole purpose of creating a digital twin. And that was cool because it really was just 3 students who they coached them along the way, but they did it all by themselves. So I thought that was a really cool project and was a successful example of building a digital twin and then seeing it in its physical form as well. So that was cool. There's a school in Atlanta, not too far away from me, called Kennesaw State University that has done some very cool things. They have one of the oldest mechatronics engineering programs in the country,
Mm.
and we've been a part of it for several years. But they're cool because they have an engineering technology program that is a 4-year kind of applied engineering school.
Hmm.
And right beside it, they have a 4-year engineering degree as well. So they share lab space, they share instructors, they do a nice job of bringing all the practical concepts into engineering that also belong in engineering technology. So they do a lot of shared projects and shared things and work together. And they also have, I think one of the videos, I think Vlad, you saw a video we did a while back. That was the backdrop of that video. You could see, robots and conveyors and all the things moving, but also software models and things like that. So they've really taken a lot of the technologies, and as technologies develop, they bring in new technologies and have students working with some of the latest and greatest on the engineering technology side that you would expect, but also on an engineering side where sometimes students don't get as much hands-on experience. They really get a lot of cool hands-on experience there. But I'll say I'm talking about 4-year universities, but probably 70% of the schools that I work with are 2-year technical and community colleges, and quite often in really rural places that are not
Hmm.
close to big cities. And when it's funny when I travel and people are like, "Oh, where are you going?" and no one's ever heard of anywhere I go because it's sort of rural technical college locations. But um, we've got some really cool examples, like in Virginia and West Virginia and rural places. There's a couple schools. One's called Thomas Nelson Community College. One's called Patrick Henry Community College, both in Virginia. And they've embedded so many credentials in a 1-year, 2-year program for students to earn. So students can hop in and they earn just certificates in PLCs and drives and lots of networking certificates, but they really see a lot of products and a lot of technologies along the way in a very accelerated format. And they graduate with their 2-year degree in engineering technology, but they also finish with a Siemens global certification in mechatronics. So that's kind of cool because it's really packed in to a 2-year
Hmm.
program in a pretty small town, pretty rural environment. The same with a small college in Western Nevada that they've built an accelerated mechatronics program at Western Nevada College, and they've built a very special program that takes like a 2-year program. And if you're coming from an existing job with existing experience, you
Mhm.
can finish a mechatronics certificate in something like 16 weeks. So you can go through a very like accelerated program at night, usually if people are working during the day, and get a cool credential in a really short amount of time. So yeah, there's lots of cool examples of people that have taken pretty complex technologies and put them into small rural technical colleges, embedded lots of credentials along the way where students can kind of earn money for those credentials or at least get
Mhm.
jobs faster because they've got those little industry credentials. So lots of cool stuff out there.
Yeah, and I think to your point of being, somewhat remote, the nature of manufacturing is that it is typically very spread out, right? Like you will see
Right.
some manufacturing plants in larger cities, but the reality is that real estate space is going to be generally more expensive. So there are many plants that are going to be outside in smaller cities. So I think it's good for those colleges, especially if they can have a partnering employer or a contact, at those manufacturers, then I think it makes a lot of sense for them to train up people. And again, in these shortened periods of times, that they can get someone that's ready to hit the floor on the manufacturing side and be able to work on these projects.
Yeah, and something I started doing since I wasn't in front of people as much over the last 18 months was, and really the only forum I had for sharing with lots of people and people who don't necessarily know me or see me very much was on LinkedIn. So I would share every week projects and pictures and things teachers would send, high school teachers, college, and they would send videos and recent projects that were completed. So all the time I would take pictures of or share the pictures that teachers send of, hey, my high schooler built this, or hey, this student team built this and it's a working elevator and all these cool things. So yeah, I really try to share as much as I can on LinkedIn just to show what students are doing and kind of bring it back so it highlights what the teachers are doing and it helps industry see what schools are doing some of these cool technology projects.
Yeah, that would be really interesting, I guess, to see an inventory of different projects. I'm assuming that there's no like one single place where they share all of that information and like pictures, but it would be interesting to see again because I'm sure you have a set curriculum and you probably have projects, from the industry, but then they can come up with whatever they want on their own. And as you mentioned, the three students that executed a digital twin, that's probably something outside of the box that they had to either maybe go to a local manufacturer or figure out on their own that there's a need for that. So it'd be really cool to have some kind of a, I don't know if it's a marketplace, but maybe a repository of interesting projects that you could do if you were to attempt that. Because again, I get those questions all the time from people who are trying to learn on their own. They're looking for different ideas.
I will say, you mentioned the curriculum. So Siemens does have that curriculum, and that's widely available. There are
Mhm.
projects that are SM 1200 projects, 1500 projects, ready-made HMI projects that anyone could download. There are Word and PDF files they could use to kind of self navigate the project. So those they could use. There isn't one central repository of all the national schools, of course, because there's not really a national view exactly, but um, there are some schools that share their project files with anyone.
Mhm.
So I try to collect as much as I can and collect at least pictures and videos, but some just share projects and they post things on curriculum sites. And so it's cool. There are lots of different folks that are proud and happy to share. But yeah,
We have a question in the chat that I want to read. So Hank says, first of all, that is awesome. Great to get current hardware and software into the hands of the next generation. And then he asks, is that program available in Canada from Siemens? And I guess to that point, everywhere else in the world as well?
yeah. SC is a global program. It, I'm the U.S. person, of course. There's someone in factory automation in Canada. I don't remember the name off the top of my head because I think it's changed recently. But there's always a contact in like Canada. There's one in Mexico. There's lots of different contacts in countries. Germany, for example, has at least five of me. So
Mhm.
larger countries have more Amandas, and smaller countries might have less Amandas. But yeah, there's a person. So I can certainly look it up and let Hank know.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would assume they cover a lot of different countries, right? Because Germany probably has the hub for Siemens, and
Right.
then they
Yeah.
cover a lot of area. No, that definitely makes sense. I want to come back to the question around the MBA, right? So you've mentioned something along the lines, and again, I'm paraphrasing, but you wanted to understand the financials a little bit better within manufacturing. And I think, maybe to generalize this a little bit more, um, in general, what do you look at when you think of I'm ready to pursue an MBA, or maybe the MBA is the next right move? What are your thoughts around that?
And I was probably a little unique in that in my undergraduate degree, my electives, I took accounting for like a week and thought it was really boring, so I dropped it and replaced it with like some other, engineering elective that was I thought was cooler. So I had very little financial preparation and going into work, and that was my own fault. So when we were moving production around, when we were scheduling products and looking at product costing, I just it wasn't intuitive to me to understand how costs are rolled into products and how we price products and cost products. So that was why I wanted to understand more about finance and accounting, just the business side of it, why we do what we do, and how we sell the products that we're making on the assembly lines. Um, but I wasn't so interested for whatever reason in getting a master's of engineering at the time. I felt like I had done the engineering undergrad, and it would be best coupled for me to do more financial classes and do finance accounting and public speaking and stuff like that. So I just thought it would be better to pursue an MBA.
And what was the discussion, I guess, because you said that Siemens supported you in going and doing that degree. What was the discussion like? Did they have, obviously, they have some concerns with you maybe having to take time off, but you said it was a night program, right? So they structured it around your work schedule. Again, were there any maybe challenges or restrictions on their side that you can share?
No, not a bit. They were really supportive. Siemens in general just supports any sort of learning and training and self advancement. So it was a really easy conversation. Um, they were always supportive. I didn't have any restrictions. Interestingly enough, I was still traveling quite a bit to other facilities, to other manufacturing facilities. So I would take classes 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 nights a week and try to schedule my. Of course, it was in person classes because this was many many years ago. But I would just try to schedule my travel around it and make it to as many classes as I could, and cover the work. But I was young, I didn't have a whole lot going on other than just work and taking classes at night. So no restrictions, no concern from Siemens. They paid for it, and as long as I did my work, and it was all good.
And would you say you were, I'd say, better understanding how things are scheduled, how they're made? I'm just curious, to loop back to your initial thoughts about pursuing the MBA. Did it answer all the questions, or were even more
It,
questions uncovered?
no, it was a lot clearer. I mean, I had to take lots of accounting and lots of finance and lots of economics classes. So yeah, I paned through it, and it was really helpful though. And it's funny because then you come back and you see the way Siemens does accounting, and you see the way other people do accounting. So but yeah, it was pretty useful. Pretty useful.
Dave, what are your thoughts on higher education of that?
My thoughts are that the only people I know who enjoy accounting classes are accountants.
Yeah.
Um, and I say that as after having taken about a year of accounting classes, the only people who enjoy accounting classes are accountants. But having the financial knowledge and understanding, I think, is very important. And when you initially were telling about kind of asking down those questions and how costing went, my thought was, I wonder if the people you were asking even know and understand how we cost into it, right?
Right.
And I find that is curiosity is always a good thing, but sometimes you reach the end of the line of, do people know kind of the answers to some of these questions? Or in many facilities I go into, it's they don't know the answers to these questions other than this is what it was when they got here, and so we're going to continue to use this and hope it continues to work. But no, so I think that's very interesting. So do you have many other colleagues who Siemens supported to go get an advanced degree, MBA, Masters of Engineering, something like that?
Yeah, there saw several people, particularly people who came in like Lewis and I did through
Mhm.
some sort of operations or leadership-based program. Um, I saw several people go get MBAs. I will say a few people opted to leave and go get like full-time MBAs because that was just a path they were interested in, or they wanted to move and do something a little bit different. So, and then some people, once they got finished with MBAs in particular, I saw them go into completely different fields, right? They would go into like investment banking or something very, very different from Siemens and engineering. So yeah, I saw lots of people getting MBAs and advanced degrees. It was widely supported.
I think that that's absolutely fantastic, and it's always good to hear of companies who will go through the process and support you with that. So I'm a little bit interested. So we had Lewis talk about his kind of experience and kind of the people that he has met during the, the first couple of years at Siemens in the leadership development program. Do you still keep in contact with the people that you were in kind of that larger program with?
Yeah, I definitely do. I actually the person that hired me to work at Siemens when I was still in college, I met he it's funny, the HR people that were kind of filtering through the resumes didn't I don't know. They weren't super interested in me for some reason. So I kind of got the guy who was off on the side and I was like, "Oh, let's talk about Siemens, let's talk about jobs." And he happened to be a VP of manufacturing.
Interesting.
So I ended up like meeting him first and going through several interviews and just had a really good gut feeling about the people that I met and the manufacturing roles, and that was kind of what drew me to it were those initial people. And that VP of manufacturing actually lives probably 10 minutes away. And he left Siemens, he started a different company, he started a couple companies at this point. But yeah, I talked to him a fair amount. His kids know my kids and we're actually friends still. And that was about 20 years ago when he hired me to come work at Siemens. So yes, and of course lots of people leave Siemens and go to different roles and go to different countries, but very much there's been some really influential managers, really great leaders, people who've encouraged me to go get MBAs and go travel and go work in places like Mexico and Germany, and that yeah, still keep in contact with and still still have great positive relationships with. So yeah, and I mean same one of the I talked to one of my previous bosses today in a meeting that she hired me to go work in the training program management apprentice building role and was really influential from just kind of being a mother and being a female in this very manufacturing and male dominated environment. So yeah, I've had some really great role models and really great managers.
And I think that's an important highlight. We've talked about this a couple of times, but networking, especially if you're, I think, again, speaking for myself, I didn't understand the value of it earlier on in my career, but I think, building those relationships and being able to talk to someone that has been in the position where you're looking to go is, I think, like extremely important. And so I think again the program that you went through as well as Lewis allowed you to build, I think, a lot of the connections from what I'm understanding that have led you to where you are today. Would that be a fair statement?
Very fair. I would say it's probably the smartest thing I did career wise was to go in and take the most challenging role I could take. So whether it was in a startup facility or a place in another country, in a union training shop, I mean, it was in a union manufacturing facility. There were not a lot of people raising their hands to take those roles because of the nature of the job or the location or whatever. So if I think doing the hard jobs early, it really paved the way for opening up those networks and meeting lots and lots of people, traveling, moving around, working in different functions and different business units. Because of course I work in an automation group now. Back then we were making circuit breakers, so the business units are different, but I still have these networks of people along the way that are internal and external to Siemens now that it's been really beneficial. I feel like years ago I would pick up the phone and call somebody and say, "Hey, what about this?" or how do you find this? And one of my bosses at the time, he said, "I think your biggest strength is just you're not afraid to pick up the phone and call and ask
Mhm.
somebody." And it was because of that big network that was created early on and just kept growing and growing and growing, and just not being afraid to take hard roles and get to talk to people.
I think it's also important to emphasize that it's a fairly competitive program, right? It's not there's not that many roles open, so you do have to be, I would say, at the top of your game to some extent, right, to get in. And I don't know if you know the numbers of how many of these positions are open, maybe on a yearly basis to engineers, but I don't think anybody could just apply and get in, right? It is fairly
Yeah.
competitive.
It changes from year to year just
Hmm.
based on how many people Siemens is hiring. So yeah, and we have different career paths within these types of programs. So there's a financial rotational program. I was in an operations program. There's a very engineering focused program now that is more on the engineering side, where I was more manufacturing focused. So, yeah, I mean, it really does change from year to year based on markets, economies, how many people Siemens can hire. So, yeah, but very competitive. It's only a handful. So,
Right, because I think like we don't want to diminish the effort required to get into that by saying, how like it's absolutely amazing, but you do need to perform at very high levels, right? Coming out of college and applying to these programs.
we do, and very, very true. I had a colleague who graduated from college with me and went straight into a manufacturing facility, and we ended up working together a couple of years down the road. And I will say he didn't go into a rotational program, but he similarly took really hard jobs. He was a third shift supervisor in the union facility in Atlanta. Then he went to Mexico and spent a year because he raised his hand and said, "Hey, I want to go there and work." And so he kind of made his own rotational program a little bit because he didn't make it in the traditional program, but he took some hard jobs and would go and find jobs that nobody else wanted to do, and took them. So he's done a really, really great job and done the same types of networking, worked around business units and different technologies, done some of the same things I've done, and not in a traditional rotational program, but just by taking challenging roles.
Right, and I mean, I think we've heard several people say this, even on the podcast, right? When you're willing to do something that's going to be a little bit more challenging, you're typically going to, I wouldn't say impress your upper management more, but you're going to ultimately be up for promotion sooner if you want to talk in like traditional terms, right? Because again, they're going to see that extra effort.
Yeah, I always tell younger people at, whenever they ask me for advice, it's do the hard jobs first, take all the risks, do everything that nobody else wants to do. And your aptitude for risk, your appetite for risk diminishes normally with age and with just things as you mature and you get older. You're not so willing to go out and do crazy stuff. But for those first 10 years or so, I mean, you can do hard jobs and risky jobs and take challenging jobs and go anywhere. And I always tell people to do all the hard stuff. Do all the hard stuff first.
What are your thoughts of, again, on the subject of continuing education, but let's say doing a master's of engineering, maybe again, followed by like preceding a bachelor's, or let's say doing 3 to 5 years on the job and then getting a master's? Do you think that's valuable in the current market? And would you, again, I think we know the value of the MBA because it really balances things out, but what are your thoughts on an engineering degree?
Yeah, I will say first on the MBA note, I found it much more valuable to work for a couple of years because it just helped everything connect in my head. So then when I went back to MBA school and I was working, it really helped me to have worked for a couple of good years and see things to make the MBA make sense for
Mhm.
me. So I was glad that I had a couple of years under my belt and was still working and adding experience while getting the MBA because it made sense in my head to see all the business connection. But um, I've looked myself at if I had a little more free time. I don't right now, but if I had a little more free time, I see all the masters in engineering, but there's some cool ones when I because I'm always at schools and colleges, right?
Yep.
So they've created new ones that are like masters of data analytics or all these cool new things that they come out with, and you read the curriculum and you read the classes. And I mean, I've like had applications in front of me and I'm like, "Oh, I don't have time because I really have like a full-time job and all these things happening." But if I could go and further education and some of the latest technologies, um, IoT or data sciences or some of these concepts, I think it would be really, really cool. And
Mhm.
it would just help that much more to bring technologies and kind of bring them in the role that I'm in now. So I could help people understand some advanced technologies and how manufacturing is changing. And yeah, I would certainly do it. I think it would be fantastic if you had the appetite and the time to do it.
And I would assume, I guess, at Siemens, you would have the choice of going like a very technical route as well, right? So you
Right.
decided to go into more like business marketing oriented role, combining the technical skills that you had before, but you could pursue a very, like you said, let's say data analytics focused, or like, again, there's a lot of AI, machine learning, or even on the manufacturing, like operation side, where you would be a lot more technical, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we have people in the US, obviously people in headquarters in Germany, but lots of people in the US to do research that work with customers and some of the advanced technology. So they're doing exactly that. So machine learning, AI, they're bringing those technologies into customers. So yeah, it'd be great to have a little more understanding of it and to actually go to school for it for another couple of years.
Dave, what do you think? Any
I
thoughts
think
of pursuing a degree yourself,
Oh,
or
I've thought about a lot of it, but I've spent
okay?
so many years of my life in school, Vlad. I feel like there are many other things, and as you and Amanda talk about advanced degrees, I think there are a lot of interesting, Coursera or Udemy or LinkedIn Learning or Google and a bunch of other places have come out with shorter certification programs, and I think those are very interesting. And it takes the right person to be interested to go and do one of those courses, but depending upon who you are, you can absolutely get a lot of them out of that, as opposed to a more formal setting. But we actually have a question from Jimmy. So Jimmy is saying, so there's, and Jimmy's in Australia, and he says, there's obviously a skill shortage in automation. Now, do you see people going into the community college or tech school route and then adding a vendor specific training to their skill set? As opposed to, or I guess, let me rephrase. So there are a couple of options, right? And I think we talked about both of them at the beginning. You could go the traditional 4-year engineering degree that's not specific to an industry or a platform, or you could go the community college tech school route and maybe add a vendor specific training on top of that, or include it as Amanda kind of described. I guess Jimmy's question is like the end result. Do you generally see that as comparable in this market, Amanda?
Yeah, and I'd say my goal is to so that students in a technical community college, high school, whatever, are actually learning in the same way you would learn at like a 1 week Siemens, a vendor training class. So they're already learning on something they would see in industry. And that's what I do. I don't want people to learn on something like we talked about Arduinos or Raspberry
Mhm.
Pis or something. I mean, you can learn programming and you can understand PLCs, but if you're not ever going to see it in industry and you spend a year talking about PLCs or reading about PLCs, if you never really program one or wire one, then that's my goal, is to bring those into college. And we do see a lot of technical community colleges. Like I said, I mean, I've seen hundreds and hundreds in the US who bring specific vendors in to their programs because they've realized the need, and it shortens the time for their students when they go to work. They're not doing so much training when they get to work because they've already done a year, 2 years at least on whatever PLC programming or something like that, networking, HMIs, all that kind of good stuff that
Mhm.
they would actually see on the job. So yeah, I mean, I think most of the technical colleges bring pretty real life practical stuff into their programs, whether it's a 8 week, 1 year, 2 year, so it gets in that vendor third party experience.
Mhm.
And it's just a little more drawn out, right? I mean, if you're in a 2 year community college environment, when you're getting a production technology degree, you're going to spend a little bit of time on math or algebra or whatever, and you got to take a communications course and you got to do some other stuff. So it's all kind of spread out, and you're going to one night, one lab per week for 6 months or something. So it's all kind of drawn out, and it's not an accelerated 8 hour a day, 5 day Siemens PLC course. But yeah, I mean, I think the end result's very, very similar. It's just in a community college, technical college, traditional academic program, you're just spacing it out a little more. And
And I'm
typically you
curious.
haven't had experience, you haven't had a background in it.
Yeah, and I'm curious to throw in into that same mix. As Dave mentioned, I think there's more and more maybe people trying to learn on their own, and whether or not you see that in the future people are still going to be obviously going the very traditional route, or do you think there's still also the opportunity to, again, I know that Siemens offers a lot of trainings that you can pay for, it's a 5-day training or split up in multiple sessions, do you see more and more people going that route because whether, they can afford college or not, or and like, I'm curious, how do you see those trainings evolve, or if ever?
Yeah, and when Dave mentioned Udemy, and so, I mean, I certainly see. I mean, you can go get like MIT courses, right, for free, and earn little
Yeah.
MIT certificates of completion, or Harvard or whatever. If you have the motivation and a little bit of discipline, you can earn a lot of those things just by self study. Um, I do see people that are absorbing excuse me, talking too much. Some of the Siemens materials as an individual, because they contact me and say, "Hey, I'm Bob and I want to learn PLCs." So say, "Oh, you can download these materials and do some self study." That's great. I think it gets more difficult because if you're alone and not part of a program or not part of a network, and you don't necessarily have the contacts, then where do you go to work? I mean, you've really got to work further than to say, "Hey, I'm Bob and I've been teaching myself PLCs for 6 weeks and I'm really, really good at it. See all the programs I've developed and I have this certificate of completion." I mean, who do you go interview for? So I mean, I think you can teach yourself the skills. You can use all of these online tools that are available, and a lot of them are free, and you can earn credentials. But then you've got to work a little bit harder to network and put yourself out there to actually get a job and to show what you've done. And you actually would have to kind of show the proof, right? Like,
Hmm.
I can do this, here's my certificate, but really I can do it, and here's what I've done, because you're not going through a traditional academic path. But yeah, I think education, I mean, obviously the last 18 months impact has had a huge impact with everybody working from home, learning from home. So yeah, I think it's education certainly changing, and people realize how much they can do from home and how much they can do in a simulated environment, or networking into where you are, Vlad, and kind of controlling the stuff behind you from my house. I
Hmm.
mean, that's all possible, and people can do that, and they don't have to be in a physical classroom building.
Yeah, and I mean, I tend to agree with everything you're saying. I think that virtualization is going to play a big impact, especially with, again, the question that always comes up is the cost of hardware. And I think, if you go through a traditional program, you get access, I feel, to a lot more than you'd be able to, like, ever buy in a personal setting.
Mhm.
Again, things behind me costed a lot of money, I can tell you that much, but for the individual that's just trying to start out, trying to get into the industry, it could be very difficult to purchase the hardware and the software required. So I think the
Yeah.
college route, and especially again, I think it's one thing, as you said, to, well, first of all, not have a PLC, but then let's say you just have a standalone PLC, and then you want to control things outside of the PLC as well, right? So the investment becomes fairly expensive really quick, because again, the hardware is meant for an industrial environment, so it's not something that you can purchase like a Raspberry Pi. Again, sure, you can turn on and off some LEDs, but it takes quite a bit of an investment, I feel, to learn on your own in a very proper lab environment. So that's certainly lacking, and I think, as I was trying to explain, the virtualization is going to solve quite a bit of that. I'm hoping in the next following years.
Yeah, we're seeing that, but also too in a traditional academic environment in the U.S., and lots of schools, particularly 2-year schools,
Hmm.
are free to students. So there are a few programs, especially for high demand fields, that you can take advantage of a 1-year, 2-year degree, and it's free. So I mean, people may not like the classroom environment and they may not want to commit to this type of program, but like you said, the access to the labs and the instructors and the materials and the projects, I mean, and if it's free, then you're not actually paying for school. So yeah, I mean,
That's
it's
good to know. I personally did not know that, so that's
yeah,
hopefully some viewers will take advantage of that for sure.
yep.
Dave, what are your thoughts before we roll out some of our final questions for Amanda as we're coming on to the hour?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think it's very interesting. And as Amanda and Vlad, you guys talked about, first you buy a PLC, and then I'm thinking to myself, let's just look behind and see what Vlad has purchased in his wall behind him. We got some motion control, we got some vision, we've got some more PLCs, we got some relays. Yeah, it gets apps. Oh, and we've got an HMI down there in the bottom left corner. So it absolutely gets very expensive very quickly. And I would also agree that kind of one of the major benefit of excuse me, one of the major benefits of continued education is that network and the people that you know, and the opportunities to go ahead and talk with them to potentially get that leg up on finding whatever is next.
That's right.
Whatever is next. And then we've got a comment in here from Hank that kind of goes along with that. He says that he's advised students to take courses and then volunteer to tag along with some of the techs in the field. That way they can prove themselves and have something for a resume. And I would say that also would give them the opportunity to get some good hands-on knowledge of what that career could look like, or what that position could look like, before you sign yourself up for something, and then 6 weeks later you kind of sit down after a whirlwind and ask yourself what you've gotten into.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good like co-op programs too, Dave. Like we had a few people mention them where you're not just learning, you're also given an opportunity to work at the same time, right? So I think a lot of schools are running those programs that help you, again, get hands-on experience, but also get a job offer right after your graduation. So that's an absolute plus.
No,
Awesome.
no, absolutely. I think that this is good, and thank you for all of those. Thank you for getting into all of that, Amanda. I like to joke this is our not sponsored Audible portion, in which I ask you if you've got an interesting book recommendation, and then Vlad will go download it on his phone as we finish up. But do you have an interesting book recommendation for us?
It's funny because the first book that popped in my head when you told me you were going to ask me this was I'm reading a couple of business related books, and like there's Marcus Gladwell. He has a popular podcast. He does some things, and it's kind of interesting. But one of my favorite books that stands out is probably not well known. It's from an author named Tim Madigan, and he's a journalist who did a lot of interviews with Mr. Rogers, the popular kid TV host, Mr. Rogers. I don't know if you had Mr. Rogers when you grew up. I don't know if you've reached Canada, but he hosts a really popular children's show from probably the 60s to the 90s, at least 80s, 90s. So it's called I'm Proud of You, My Friendship with Fred Rogers. And I think it's just a really interesting book, looking at this very, very famous character, but it's kind of an uplifting book, and looks at like the good in humankind, and how he was wildly successful, but was also just like a really, really good human. And I just thought it was interesting. But someone also told me that because I read it on airplanes, that you tend to get more emotional on airplanes, and you tend to like have really high highs and really low lows when you're on a plane, altitude, or just being in a confined space. So I also read it entirely on airplanes, but I thought it was fantastic. And I always remember that book as being super cool, and I always kept it. A book I'm reading now, much, much heavier. It's not a light read, and I haven't gotten through much of it. It's called Sapiens, and it's all about like development of humans, and it's interesting, especially now when you just see all this crazy stuff happening in the world. And it's the author's last name is Harari, Harari, probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's a brief history of humankind. And it's a thick one, but it's really interesting. Again, it's not a business book. It's not a 7 Habits of Highly Effective People book that we've all read and done all those things, but it's just cool because it talks a lot about humans' impact on Earth, and the Earth's impact on humans, and evolution and creation, and just interesting stuff. But yeah, it's not exactly a beach read. So
no,
but that's good. I
mean,
we like to not have standard recommendations. Really
there's some
appreciate that.
non-standard ones.
Thanks. I'm curious. Do you read the physical book, or do you listen to audiobooks like on an airplane?
I read the physical book.
Awesome.
Interesting. No, I think that's very good. I have heard about the Mr. Rogers book and heard that it was a good book, but I have not read that. And maybe it makes it to the top of the list, and we see if it's as good outside of airplanes as it is inside of airplanes.
Yeah, I actually thought about, when you asked me, I should probably read it again on ground and see if I like it as much, because I just thought it was fantastic.
No, I love that. No, that's perfect. Thank you. And so, last question that I have for you, Amanda, is generally who should reach out to you. But I would say that you already have people asking, who is your counterpart in Canada and who is your counterpart in Australia, because they're interested to learn more about your programs. So I guess the question to you continues to go out: who should reach out to you?
Um, yeah, and I know that my contact information is actually on the US SCE site. It's usa.siemens.com/SCE. So there are like direct links to my contact information there for the US, and other countries have the same, and they're sort of like support finders for education. But I'm always happy to talk to particularly educators who want to bring in advanced manufacturing related concepts, anything from manufacturing, programming, robotics, any of those things into whatever type of classroom or learning environment. I would be very excited to talk to any sort of educator. But then there's sort of the periphery, the network around educators too, right? Like if you work at a factory and you're hiring people, or you know you can't find enough trained automation technicians, engineers, programmers, then maybe we need to find the local school and introduce these sort of tools and benefits and resources and discounts to say, hey, local school, did you know that you could have all this stuff and teach all this stuff to your students, and it's pretty easy. So yeah, anybody who really wants to introduce this in an educational environment, I'd welcome the conversation.
No,
Thank you
that's
again,
amazing.
Amanda.
Thank you.
I really
Yes.
appreciate it.
Any
Thank you
last
guys.
comments, Vlad?
No, I don't have any, Dave.
Okay. No, awesome. Well, everyone, if you've somehow managed to make it this far, again, thank you very much for listening to episode 25 of Manufacturing Hub. Amanda has been a fantastic guest, and we look forward to hearing everyone's feedback. And if you've made it this far, because I like to joke, we're semi-professional podcasters at this point, Amanda, we're supposed to ask for like thumbs up and 5-star reviews and comments and things like that.
Right.
Thanks again, everyone. Thank you,
Appreciate it,
Amanda.
everyone.